This is Mr. Schwenke with our new way of doing online PowerPoints in biology. We spent the first part of the year up until now in most classes looking at a PowerPoint as a starting point and then going from there to discussions about things the PowerPoint brings up or some of the worksheets. Excuse me. So I want to continue that now. Our topic for today will be biochemistry, and biochemistry seems to have a couple of words, bio and chemistry. That's not too hard. We know that bio relates to biology. We know that chemistry relates to chemistry, elements, compounds, explosions, reactions, all that cool stuff. So biochemistry would be the chemistry of living things, and living things do have some chemistry. They really do. Our bodies are little chemical factories. Okay, I'd like to thank a teacher named Mrs. Jordy at Saratoga Springs High School for letting us use her PowerPoints. I made a few modifications, but it's a good PowerPoint, and I don't mind sharing my PowerPoints when I make them as well. Let's move on to this. That looks like something pretty good. I don't know whether you like avocados or not. I'm trying to adjust this little thing here. Avocados are green, at least when we cut them open and squish them. The ones in the background there, back over here, are sort of green. And we like it that way. But when they sit out for a while, they turn brown. How can we stop an avocado from turning brown? Well, in the upper left picture here, there's Monday, there's Tuesday, there's Wednesday. I assume we sliced this avocado on Monday. And it carried through all the way to Thursday, and by Thursday is 3 o'clock, it's looking kind of nasty. I don't really know that it changes that fast from 3 p.m. on Thursday, sort of greenish, to 3:01 p.m., nasty and brown, but it does change pretty fast. If we read the text, anyone who's ever purchased an avocado will testify that after taking several days to reach the point of perfect ripeness, they remain at that point for an incredibly short period of time before morphing or turning into a brown mess. As if to compound this problem, if you do catch them at the optimum, which means best ripeness, they turn brown very quickly after being cut open, if not eaten straight away. So avocados seem to react with something when we cut them open. The skin of the avocado keeps it safe before that. And if you think about that, when you cut an avocado open, you're exposing it to air. And if you think a little bit about air, air is both basically nitrogen and oxygen and a few other things. So one of those gases seems to be affecting the avocados. Maybe we can figure it out. Okay, now another thing that comes up when you talk about avocados is guacamole, which we started our picture of. And think about that, you can come over here and look at this little chart here. These are chemical elements. Na is sodium. Na doesn't sound like sodium, but we'll talk about that later. Carbon is letter C. Holmium is letter HO. Notice if it's got two letters, the first one is capitalized, the second one is lowercase. And sulfur is the last one. And put those up there simply because they spell nachos, N-A-C-H-O-S, which we can make from guacamole. But the turning brown seems to be some kind of a reaction relating to organic material. So let's see if we can figure out why. Chemistry is the foundation of biology as well as lots of other sciences, and chemistry tells us how stuff works and what it's made of. We study chemistry to understand the structure and function of the cells that make up living things. Matter is what we learned it was in 4th grade and 7th and 8th grade science, anything that has mass and takes up space. And matter, adjust this again, matter, the basic form of pure matter is an element. Elements, if I take an atom anywhere from an element sample, the atom will be like any other I can take from that sample. Whereas compounds have multiple elements. So let's look at atoms first. They form elements if they're just piled together. If we mix them with other atoms, we can get compounds. These are little water droplets, H2O, little tiny hydrogens there on the end, and the red one would be oxygen. And molecules don't really have sticks between them like this. When we build models of molecules, we do that, but that's not the way they really occur. Okay, elements have symbols. C is for carbon. The 6 stands for its atomic number. It's a series of increasing numbers as we go across the periodic table. It stands for the number of protons in the atom. And this number down here is the number of mass units. In other words, how much does this atom weigh? Well, it looks like it weighs a little bit more than 6 more than this. So those additional 6 things are the neutrons. Neutrons don't change an element from being that element, but they can make it behave a little bit differently. And carbon can have no neutrons, or 2 neutrons, or 4 neutrons. It's kind of weird. Okay, nitrogen, atomic number 7, symbol N, atomic mass 14, which means it's got 7 more things in addition to the protons. Hydrogen, atomic number 1, atomic mass 1.008, which means there must be some heavier forms of hydrogen. And what we do, this number is the average. If we take 1,000 hydrogen atoms and average their weight, some will have a neutron, some will not, so it makes that number be a little bit more than 1. And here's oxygen. Oxygen is close to 16, and that's again an average weight. So elements, simplest form of a substance, cannot be broken down. Elements are assigned symbols, and again, sometimes they make sense, like carbon and oxygen and chlorine. Those 3 make a lot of sense, but lead does not. We don't have lead on here. Lead has a symbol Pb, which is nothing like the word lead. And Pb comes from an expression plumb line, P-L-U-M-B. A plumber uses a weight. If they want to get a pipe straight, a mason, hanging weight, can show you a line perpendicular to the Earth's surface. A mason, a brick person, might want to have bricks lined up straight, so we can use a string with a weight on it to get a vertical reference when we're building something. And that's where that symbol comes from. Kind of strange. Okay, periodic table of elements is a listing of all the elements. There's one in our classroom, and over here on the far left side are simple and reactive elements: hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium, and francium. The further down you get, the bigger the atoms are. The further across you go, the different structure. These are basically nonmetals, and these are metals in the middle, things you recognize: copper and zinc and iron and magnesium, or manganese, and so on. Chrome, like shiny bumpers on your car. And over here are highly reactive alkaline elements, and fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And these guys next to this would be helium, neon, argon. These are called the noble gases. They don't react much at all. They have a complete outer shell of electrons, which means they're not interested in stealing protons from anybody, or electrons, I mean. Okay, elements of life are the ones we want to focus on in this course. H-O-N-C. Not the right way to spell honk, but you can remember it. Honk if you love modeling molecules. These would be models with little sticks holding them together. One thing we look at with atoms is how many electrons do they want to take or give when they form a compound. Hydrogen only has 1 electron, so it can take 1, but more typically it gives 1. Oxygen has 2. Oxygen can form compounds by giving up or borrowing 2 electrons. Nitrogen 3, and carbon 4. The outer shell of electrons, at least in the simpler ones, can have up to 8 electrons. So carbon can either gain 4 or lose 4 if it forms a compound. Okay, 96% of organic compounds that make up life are these guys: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. And there's our honk, H-O-N-C. These are the elements of life. Your body is made mostly of these things, which is kind of weird. I don't know where that picture came from, and I don't want to think about it. Honk, if you love modeling molecules. The number represents the number of bonds each one of these guys can make. So hydrogen can only make 1 bond at a time, oxygen 2, nitrogen 3, and carbon 4. The more bonds you can make with it, the more different elements, or compounds, it can form, which is kind of interesting. Chemical bonds, well, we have 2 types. One is called covalent, and one is called ionic. Covalent sort of sounds like cooperation. We share some of these electrons, so at any one time, this carbon guy thinks he's got 8, and his outer shell. The outer shell would be the furthest line away from the center of this atom, and it would like to have 8 there. So this guy right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, he's sharing these ones from the oxygen. 4 on that side and 4 on this side. He's happy. He's got 8 in this outer shell. He stole a few of them. Actually, he's sharing them. And same for the oxygens. They want 8 in their outer shell. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they get 2 of these, 7, 8 on this side. So anyway, so covalent bonds are shared electrons. Ionic bonds are when we transfer electrons. Sodium wants to give up 1 electron, so its outer shell will be the one underneath with 8 here. So this is going to be, he gives an electron to chlorine, and that forms a compound called sodium chloride, which is salt. We put that on our French fries. When we watched that movie called The Elements in the fall, we saw what happens if you throw sodium in water. It's not pretty. It's messy. Okay. The elements form bonds to make themselves become more stable, and energy is formed. It takes energy to form a bond, and that energy is given up when the bond is broken. Okay, let's see here. Elements and compounds formed when 2 or more elements bond together, and that's a compound. Water is a compound, H2O. 2 types are inorganic, which means non-living, versus organic. This is not the organic like we find in the Wegmans store where we have organic broccoli or something. I hope any broccoli you eat, it's going to be organic because it's a growing thing. Inorganic would be something that is not necessarily part of a living organism, but can be. And let's see how that fits our descriptions here. Inorganic compounds, well, carbon dioxide, CO2, every time you breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide, so your body's producing this inorganic compound. So we have inorganic compounds in us too. Water molecules make up a lot of our body, but they're also inorganic compounds. And so inorganic means that it can exist in a living organism, or it can exist like in a rock or in the sky or something like that. Neither contains carbon. This is a definition that's kind of puzzling. Inorganic compounds contain either carbon or hydrogen or neither one. So how much use is that? And they're made by nature, can be found in living things, and necessary for life, but they're not part of life in terms they don't grow. And I gave you the examples before: water, carbon dioxide, and minerals like salt and calcium. Most water that we drink has a few minerals dissolved in it because it makes the water taste better. Okay, here's water. Looks like a Mickey Mouse, and the 2 hydrogens are over here on the left side, the top, and oxygen there. It doesn't really look exactly like that, but it shows that the hydrogens are smaller than the oxygen, and this angle is kind of important. So this is water. It's an inorganic compound necessary for cells to perform life functions. It's basically breaks up molecules to allow chemical reactions to occur. That's the water can dissolve things. We wash stuff in water. And it's stable. It doesn't break down into other compounds or other elements. Water can evaporate or freeze or be liquid. Those are the physical phases of water, but that's still the water molecule in just a different physical stage. Okay, organic compounds have to contain carbon and hydrogen. If it doesn't contain carbon and hydrogen, it's not an organic compound. Compounds made by living things would be carbohydrates, which include sugars, proteins, lipids, which is a funny name for fats like vegetable oil and things like that, and nucleic acids. The key there should be, well, nucleus, it sounds like. And we studied cells. In the nucleus of cells, we have DNA and RNA. So these are some of the compounds made by living things. Carbon is kind of the key one. Carbon can make 4 bonds and form rings, can make 4 bonds and form rings in large chains. I'm not sure why that's stuck through there. And here's an example: carbon sticking together with single bonds, carbon sticking together with double bonds, carbon sticking together with triple bond. They can form all sorts of fancy shapes. Here's some shapes in carbon. They can have a string of carbons with other stuff attached. They can have double bonds. A double bond is 2 bonds between these guys, and the rest of this one has single bonds. The number of sticks there represents the bonds. Here's a double bond in the middle. We can also have branching shapes, and we have, most importantly, we can have these rings, which let me build all sorts of fancy molecules. That's why carbon is such a critical thing for life. Circle all the organic molecules. How do you know they're organic? Well, they have carbon and hydrogen. So water is not organic. Proteins are complicated and they are organic. How about CH3OH? Does it have carbon and hydrogen? OH is a hydroxide. So anyway, we're not chemists. We don't know these yet, but we know that fats are organic, and H2SO4 is sulfuric acid. Is that organic? No, it doesn't have carbon in it. How about this guy, CH3COOH? Does it have carbon? Yes. Hydrogen? Yes. Oxygen? Yes. That's organic. Here's the nutrition from an avocado. Remember, we're talking about avocados on this thing. It's got 98.4 grams of water. Well, that's inorganic. The fat is 21.0 grams. That's organic. Protein 2.7. That's organic. Carbohydrate 11.8. That's organic. Potassium 690. That's not organic. These are elements here. And magnesium 39. So bottom line is, we can look at stuff and tell pretty simply if they're organic or inorganic. Macromolecules are molecules that are made from smaller molecules. Macro means like big. So these are things that these look like pictures from an amoeba sister thing that we saw, and we're going to actually watch one more tomorrow. Organic compounds called macromolecules are complex molecules made from smaller ones, and they make up the things that life is based on: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Those are all macromolecules. Proteins tend to have nitrogen, carbon, oxygen in them. Nucleic acids have sort of the same things. They're similar to proteins, but they often have a ring structure and they're more complex. Carbohydrates tend to have rings or straight line carbon things, and lipids or fats tend to have joined lines of carbons with hydrogens going off of them. So you can get an idea what kind of a molecule it is by looking at the structure if we have that picture. If you ever get a prescription that comes in a box, inside the box will be a little paper that has to give you instructions for that medicine, and often it'll have a diagram of the molecular structure of that medicine that they gave you, which is kind of interesting. Complex organic molecules, fats and lipids, they can look really scary looking. These are carbon strings. This would be a lipid, and lipids store a lot of energy because they have a lot of bonds. It takes energy to make bonds, and when you break up the bonds, you get that energy back. So fat molecules are very important for biology. Lipids in your body form the cell membranes, which are called phospholipids. They also make up hormones: testosterone, estrogen, insulin, other hormones that make our bodies work. And cholesterol is not always bad. Cholesterol is a substance, a type of fat that is necessary for cells, and your body will make cholesterol if you don't eat enough of it, but it's also possible to get too much. Carbohydrates tend to have these rings. They are short-term energy. Some athletes will do carb loading before a race or a game, and a cross-country runner is going to run 3.5 or longer, and the next day she might have some extra carbs the night before. Not like 5 pounds of them, but extra carbs, because they do represent stored short-term energy, and that's what we needed to run those miles. Okay, simple sugars. Well, on the right is glucose, the simplest sugar. If you're diabetic, you worry about your glucose values, and that has 1 carbon ring. Sucrose, or table sugar, has 2 rings, and it's sort of like this one. It's just a little bigger molecules, macromolecules. We can have glucose, fructose, and sucrose. So monosaccharides, mono means one. So these would be 1 ring. These are all different types of sugars. Fructose is the fruit sugar, glucose is the regular simple sugar, and galactose is one other form of sugar. There's lots of different forms of sugar. Disaccharides would be, di means 2, that would be the sucrose, which is table sugar. And then polysaccharides, many sugars, these tend to be starches and sugars, and this has quite a complicated structure. If you see something like this, it's probably a carbohydrate, and it's one of these saccharides. Complex organic molecules in the nucleic acids have the DNA and RNA that tells your body how to make new cells and reproduction into similar cells and so on. And that's the genetic code that lets life carry on from one generation to the next. We studied those a little bit right before we took a break, and we learn about the DNA and RNA. We don't have to know all the nitty-gritty of that for our course, but if you become a doctor or a nurse, you're going to learn a lot of that stuff in a course called organic chemistry. There's DNA and RNA. Nucleotides are part of the DNA, and we learned about the phosphate group and the pentose and the nitrogen base when we looked at the stuff a couple weeks ago. Proteins are complicated molecules. They have nitrogen and they have monomer structure. They have side chains. They're found in, well, they just give us examples of chicken, fish, and eggs, but beef and other meats are basically muscle tissue, and that's protein. And we sometimes have these molecules that make three-dimensional models and turn them. Okay, amino acids are building blocks for proteins. We can make an amino acid into a protein down here, and then it will look like this. So we can get some really complicated ones, a pepsin, growth hormone, hemoglobin like in your blood, and collagen like your fingernails and your skin and your hair. And amino acids bond together in different ways to make proteins that have different shapes and different functions. Okay, hormones, chemical messengers in the body. They tell your body to do or not to do things. Enzymes we're going to study next lecture we have. Enzymes speed up chemical reactions and make them more efficient. Cell membranes are things that get to decide what gets into and out of a cell. And antibodies, a very popular word right now, fight off infection. If you have an infection, you develop antibodies to it. But unfortunately, with the coronavirus, it's a brand new virus in this planet. Nobody has antibodies to it until they have it and get over it. And once that happens, they don't have to worry about it again. They might get a variation of it, but not nearly as bad. Okay, so this is just a little picture of this. These were the things, the chloroplasts and chromosomes. Just the pictures are interesting to look at. Triglycerides, fatty acids, amino, and here's the overall classification: lipids, proteins, nucleic acid, and carbohydrates. And last thing on this presentation, the avocado. Remember the one we started with? Based on the following information, explain why the organic compounds in an avocado are beneficial. 64 calories, that's not a lot of calories. 6 grams of fat, which is good fat, and 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate. It's a good food. Avocados are healthy. We're going to stop there, and what you need to do now is look at the website and see excuse me, see what we have to do. You have to check the website every day to see what we're doing that day. If you don't remember how to read stuff or how to send me stuff, look at the thing that's called How To Online. It's linked from the website. And you guys have a good day.